Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. And before we leave Mark's Gospel, I wanted us to just remember a few things about it today, talk about it. I hope you've enjoyed our study of Mark's Gospel. I love Mark's Gospel. I love it so much, and I use it probably more than any other Gospel in a larger variety of ways. I have to say, in terms of affection, I'm drawn to John's Gospel more in terms of my own private reading and devotion. But in terms of just being the workhorse that shares the stories about Jesus' life, Mark's Gospel, to me, is the one that I seem to turn to more than any other because it's so vivid. We talked about that, and it's fast-paced. It's fast-paced and it's vivid. Matthew's Gospel, and of course Matthew contains the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew contains the 5 sermons. And heavens, I mean, probably if we had one thing we could hold on to from the Gospels, if we had the Sermon on the Mount, we'd know what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. But Matthew's Gospel is written to a Jewish audience, and I'm not a Jewish audience, although it is important to me, being raised on both the Old and New Testaments, to know how Jesus fulfilled everything in the Old. Luke's Gospel is a wonderful read as a researched biography, and of course it has things in it we don't find anywhere else, particularly the Road to Emmaus story, which is irreplaceable, and which Mark alludes to, but which Luke evidently chased down and found the details about and recorded them for us. I love Luke's Gospel. If you want to just read a biography, pick up a good book and let that biography be about Jesus. Pick up Luke. Don't go anywhere else. Pick up Luke and read that one. But Mark, when you want to share the story with someone else, when I start to study with someone who has no knowledge, who has had no church background, who doesn't know any more about Jesus than what's out there in the air and the culture, which is a lot, by the way, but much of it is skewed. I send him straight to Mark's Gospel. And I'll say, read Mark's Gospel. It's only 16 chapters. You can literally sit down. If you are paying attention and you're not distracted, you can read Mark's Gospel in 2 hours or less, depending on how quickly you read. It is so fast-paced. It is so vivid. It's so full of visual detail. It appeals to our senses. Mark tells us what things look like, what the patterns were, what the colors were, what it sounded like, what it tasted like. I mean, Mark gives us. That is so, it just feeds your imagination. It just puts you there in a way the other Gospels do not. Probably because this exists as a script or a transcript for the preaching of the gospel. Let's not forget that. Every source that tells us Mark recorded this gospel and wrote it down tells us he was writing down what he heard Peter preach. And so, it's almost certain, at least in my mind, that what we're reading is a script or at least a transcript of the presentation of the gospel to an audience that's hearing it perhaps for the first time. That's why to me it's perfect in sharing the story of Jesus with someone. So I always, when I'm starting a study, we go straight to Mark's Gospel. And it really excites. I've never had it fail to excite. Someone who really wants to know about Jesus really gets to know. And then you can flesh out the story of Jesus with other episodes when you find out what interests them about Jesus. And you can, as you talk to them about their study of the book of Mark and their experience, I really liked when he fed the 5,000. That was really cool. Well, but you know what happened in the aftermath in John's Gospel, and you can really flesh out the story. Go to the Road of Emmaus story, or talk more about Mary Magdalene. I want to know more about her. Well, let's go to John's Gospel, John chapter 20, and it just is really the gateway into a broader study of the life of Jesus with the other Gospels. And I hope I illustrated that these last few weeks, and especially these last few sessions, how the other 3 Gospel writers reach back into Mark's Gospel, it seems to me, Clearly, Luke and John do this, and give us some more detail because they know our interest has been piqued. And so this is a really good in terms of evangelism. I also use it in preaching. If I know that I'm going to tell the story of the feeding of the 5,000, and I'm going to preach on the feeding of the 5,000, I'm going to preach from Mark's text because it lends itself to vocal delivery because it's so full of detail and full of sights and sounds like that. A perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. Whenever you can just share the experience that way, and it's right there in the biblical text. I always go to an event if I can, almost always, from Mark's Gospel because we're going to get it's going to appeal to the senses and the imagination of the listener because it's written for the listening audience. I really believe that. Okay, well, since Peter is likely the source of Mark's Gospel, I thought we'd talk more about Peter. We're not going to embark on a life of Peter, but I want to study 1st and 2nd Peter, which were written at the end of Peter's life. But we're going to take one session next time just to breeze through what we know about Peter from the book of Acts. A study of the life of Peter we'll do later on because it's so rewarding. And we love him, which I have never met anyone who doesn't love Peter. Even though he's flawed, probably because he is. And so next time we'll talk about Peter in the book of Acts as preparation for opening 1st and 2nd Peter. Thank you for joining me for 5 Good Minutes with the Word and for joining me in this study of Mark's Gospel. We'll talk about Peter next time.